The Super Mario series is, without a doubt, one of, if not the most iconic video game franchises the world over. People who don't even have the slightest interest in video games still know Mario because that's just how prolific the series has become. However, despite its status as a veritable Goliath of the gaming industry, Super Mario still has many things in common with your average video game series. And one thing in particular that all games have to go through if they want to be sold around the world is localization. For those unfamiliar with the term, localization is the process of adapting a piece of media to better suit a specific target culture or audience. This is typically said to just pertain to language, but in my opinion, localization can go beyond just simple language and spread to things like art and music, at least in the case of video games. And like I've said before, localization is not an exact science. The opinions and biases held by a particular company or individual localizer more often than not have some impact on the level to which a piece of media is localized. And in my opinion, that usually leads to what I like to call over-localization. Now, I've already made an entire video on over-localization, so I won't go into too much detail here, but I will give you a basic definition of the concept. In my opinion, over-localization is when a piece of media is changed not out of necessity, but based on an opinion held by the person or persons responsible for the localization. For example, the original Japanese title of Animal Crossing is Dobutsu no Mori, or literally translated Animal Forest. Clearly, this was not a change made out of necessity because the title Animal Forest is perfectly understandable by English speakers. But then, why was the title changed? Well, it was most likely because someone at Nintendo had the opinion that the title Animal Crossing might attract more Western buyers or some other arbitrary reason like that. Thus, the title was changed, not because it needed to be, but because someone felt it would be better if it was. Hopefully you guys followed all that. But how does all this over-localization stuff connect back to Super Mario? Well, Mario, just like any other game that goes through localization, has been subject to over-localization on numerous occasions. And in this video, I'd like to kind of take you guys on a little journey through the Super Mario series as it evolved over the years and show you how certain aspects of the games were over-localized by Nintendo. So buckle up and keep your hands and feet inside the time machine, because we're going way back to the year 1985 when the first game in the series, Super Mario Bros., was released. I know it's not the first game in the Mario series as a whole, but we're here to talk about Super Mario today, so we're going to be starting with this entry in the series. There's nothing really too interesting about the older games, so you're not missing much, trust me. Now, as you might have already surmised, there isn't really all that much text in the original Super Mario Bros., or any Super Mario game really, so that's not what we're going to be focusing on here. What we are going to be focusing on, at least for now, is the information that can be found in the manual of the game, specifically the names of certain characters. And as far as I could see, there are only a few characters in all of Super Mario Bros. That don't have over-localized names. The most important of these characters, of course, being Mario himself. One common theme we see across many of Nintendo's games that have been localized over the years is that even if a specific localization of a game is particularly intensive, the main character usually retains their name. And as we can see here, that is something that started way back with Mario. I'm personally really happy they didn't give him an overly Americanized name over here like Mark or something. I mean, could you imagine? But like I said, other than Mario and Luigi, I guess, almost all other characters in the game have had their original Japanese names changed. And I'm not just talking about literally translating the names. Nintendo completely altered the original meaning. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them because that would just take too much time, but I will mention a few that I find particularly interesting. Number 1 is Bowser. I'm sure most people already know this, but Bowser's original name is actually Daimao Koopa, or Great Demon King Koopa. The name Koopa actually comes from the Korean rice soup known as gukbap, pardon my pronunciation, which when transliterated into Japanese becomes Koopa. The reason the character got this name was supposedly because when the team at Nintendo was trying to come up with the name for the boss of Super Mario Bros., one employee just randomly said, "I want to go out to Korean barbecue and eat gukbap." I guess everyone thought it was a good name, so they went with that. However, the question remains, why did they change his name from Koopa to Bowser in the West? Well, on that point, your guess is as good as mine. Both names mean basically nothing to the intended audience of the game, so why was a name change warranted? Well, like I said earlier, this was based on the opinion of the localizer or company in charge of the game at the time. They probably felt it had to be changed because it was a name for a Korean food that Westerners wouldn't necessarily understand, but I don't think the point of the name was to make a reference to the food. It's just a funny name that sounds kinda nice, so they used it. Nothing more and nothing less. In my opinion, there's never really a good reason to localize a name, especially one that doesn't have any deep cultural meaning to it like Koopa. As characters like Pikachu have shown us, the name of a character is ultimately inconsequential to the players. If a character is likable, people will like them. It's that simple. Changing names across regions accomplishes little other than to confuse people like it has with Bowser and many other Mario characters. Another major character from the Super Mario Bros. Series that had their name changed was Princess Toadstool. Her original name was the name she is known by today, Peach. Once again, the change all comes back to opinion. Since Peach is the princess of the Mushroom Kingdom, her name was changed to Princess Toadstool to further emphasize that fact. However, this name did not stick for very long at all. With the release of Mario 64, her name was officially reverted back to Peach for unknown reasons, even further confusing everyone. If I had to guess, I'd say it was done because Princess Toadstool is not a very great name, and was probably hard for younger kids to understand. But this once again begs the question, why even change the name in the first place? Peach is an English word with an English meaning, so what was the point? It's not like Koopa where you can explain it away with stuff like Westerners don't know what Gook-Bop is. It was just a completely arbitrary change that did not have to be made in any regard. But if you thought Peach was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Let's talk about Koopa Troopa. Koopa Troopa's Japanese name, if you didn't know, is Noko Noko. It's never been expressly stated why he has this name, but the term Noko Noko means to have no awareness of one's surroundings or the situation at hand. It's almost like the phrase without a care in the world in English. At least that's the best comparison that I can think of. Noko Noko is also often used in conjunction with words like to show up or to appear, as in, this guy just showed up without a care in the world. It's a word that doesn't really have the best connotations in Japanese and essentially amounts to calling someone an idiot, or at least something close to that. But there is also a possible double meaning here. The Japanese word for mushroom is kinoko, so the noko in Noko Noko might be referring to that as well. That's just my personal theory though. But anyway, when Super Mario Bros. Came over from Japan, Noko Noko's name was changed to Koopa Troopa. Just why? You changed Bowser's name from Koopa to something else, so why did you change another character's name from something that had nothing to do with Koopa and would have been a fine name on its own to Koopa? This decision honestly defies all reason. I can't think of a possible explanation for why this was done or even why it was considered. If you're going to use the name Koopa for someone else, just leave Bowser as Koopa. What was wrong with Noko Noko? It makes just as much sense as Koopa to the average Westerner in Nintendo's mind, so why not just leave it? In my opinion, this is an example of a practice in localization that was rather common back in the day, and that is the idea of just change it for the purpose of changing it. There's no other possible explanation other than the localizers just wanted to change it. They felt like if they changed everything, even stuff that didn't need to be changed and stuff that didn't make any sense to change, then that would make the game more original or some weird logic like that. If you couldn't already tell, this is a type of localization that I could never get behind. Alright, we'll do one more. Bullet Bill's Japanese name is actually just Killer, or Kira, if you want to pronounce it like it's written. Now this one might seem like it makes a bit of sense, right? You obviously can't call a character in a kid's game Killer because that's just too violent for their young ears. But, throughout the entire English Super Mario Bros. Manual, there are countless references to killing and dying. In fact, in Bullet Bill's own description, it says you can kill him by jumping onto him from above. Kill. They essentially used the word they changed, so what was the point? The funny part is the Japanese manual makes no reference to killing in the description. It just says you can jump on him from above to knock him down. So why? I don't understand the logic here. Someone please explain this to me because I feel like I'm losing my mind. Let's just go on to the next game. Super Mario Bros. 2. Oh, Super Mario Bros. 2, what did they do to you? As I'm sure many of you have already heard, this one's a complete mess. In what is probably still, to this day, the worst case of over-localization that I've ever seen, Nintendo actually released 2 separate games with the same name in Japan and America. Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan was a game that was built off the design and mechanics of the original Super Mario Bros., but just offered a greater challenge. It was meant as a game for people who completed the first game and wanted to face the full brunt of what the developers could do in terms of challenging level design. However, when the game went in for testing over here in America, the guy in charge of the game said it was too hard and too similar to the original, so he rejected it. This led to Nintendo making a reskin of the game Doki Doki Panic that definitely never would have been released in America, and just slapping the name Super Mario Bros. 2 on it. And from that day forth, every time someone mentioned Super Mario Bros. 2, it would be followed by the obligatory question, do you mean the Lost Levels or the Doki Doki Panic version? As I've been saying, over-localization very often leads to confusion down the line, and Super Mario Bros. 2 is a perfect example of that. But to make matters worse, the Doki Doki Panic reskin version of the game was actually released in Japan as well under the name Super Mario USA. And as I said before, the original was also released in the West under the name Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. So we essentially have 4 names for what was originally supposed to be a single game. It's a mess. Moving on to a game that actually stayed as a single product, we have Super Mario Bros. 3. And when it comes to Super Mario Bros. 3, the main thing that was changed across regions once again were the characters. The most important of these changes being those done to the Koopalings, known as the Kokoopa Nana Kyodai, or 7 baby Koopa siblings. The weird thing about this one is that the Koopalings didn't originally have names in the Japanese version of Super Mario Bros. 3. They were just collectively called the 7 baby Koopa siblings and nothing more. It was a person at Nintendo of America that came up with their names for the American release. This is very evident by just looking at the 2 pages where they're featured in both manuals. The person who picked the names has said that he based them on famous musicians like Ludwig van Beethoven and Iggy Pop. The only one of the Koopalings not named after a musician, though, is Larry because he just looked like a Larry. I do believe this to be a very egregious example of over-localization because the characters originally had no names and they were given names. But at the same time, I'd rather a name be given to a character with no name than a character who already has one, so I'm kind of torn on this one. It's definitely over-localization, but it doesn't sting as bad as some of the other examples we've seen. But other than the Koopalings, we also have the introduction of many other mainstay Mario enemies to talk about here. Don't worry, we won't go over all of them. First off, we've got the Chain Chomp, known as Wan Wan in Japanese. Wan Wan is the Japanese onomatopoeia for a dog's bark, so you can see why they're very often treated as dogs throughout the series. In my opinion, this one is pretty bad because it takes away the core meaning that this is supposed to be a dog. At least change it to something like Bark Bark or Barker. That way we would still have that same association with dogs that is presented in the Japanese game. We also saw the introduction of the Bob-omb in Super Mario Bros. 3, and they had their names changed from the Japanese Bomuhei, meaning bomb soldier. This is another one of those just change it to change it ones because the direct translation of bomb soldier would have been totally fine in my opinion. One thing you'll notice if you really dive into looking at the different ways Nintendo localizes their names is that sometimes, like with the Bomb Soldier, Nintendo of America take a name in Japanese that would be considered very regular and try to spice it up. Another example of this, in my opinion, is the way Boo is represented in Super Mario Bros. 3. In Japanese, Boo is known as Teresa, which comes from the word tereru, or to be shy, pointing towards how they get all shy and stop moving when you look at them in the game. To a native Japanese speaker, it is a name that could be considered very simple. However, in the English version of the game, instead of calling them, Shy Guy maybe, they decided to go with Boo Diddley. What? It's just dumb. This was presumably a reference to Bo Diddley, the American musician, but in my opinion, it missed the mark by a long shot. And one last thing I'd like to mention is Raccoon Mario. In Japanese, it's known as Shippo Mario, or Tail Mario. Why they felt the need to over-localize something so simple and easy to understand like this, I can't be sure, but it might have been because of the tanuki suit being a reference to the Japanese tanuki, or raccoon dog. Since they didn't over-localize that one, and just left it as the tanuki suit, albeit with a weird spelling, they felt they had to get raccoon in there somehow, and here we are. And the last game we're going to talk about in this video is Super Mario World. Just like pretty much every other 2D Mario game, Super Mario World is chock full of over-localization in its characters. My favorite example is the enemy known as Rip Van Fish. In Japanese, he's known simply as Goo Ska, which is the onomatopoeia for snoring. However, in English, his name is a reference to Rip Van Winkle, a literary character who slept for 20 years. Did you really think 5-year-olds would get that reference here? I didn't even get it until I looked it up, so I doubt kids at the time fared any better. The name makes sense when you think about it, but it's such a weird and obscure reference that as opposed to finding the name amusing, I find it just plain weird for a Nintendo game. Like I said before, the Nintendo localizers back then often went way too far with the references. Another rather odd choice of name change comes in the form of the Wiggler. With a name like the Wiggler, you might think the Japanese name would be something like the onomatopoeia for wiggling around or something like that, but that's not the case at all. The Wiggler's Japanese name is actually Hana-chan, Hana literally meaning flower in Japanese. This is a reference to the flower that grows out of the top of the Wiggler's head. Super Mario World is also home to many dinosaur characters like Rex and Dino Rhino. And, you guessed it, they all also have very over-localized names. Rex is known in Japanese as Dorabon, a combination of the word Doragon, or dragon, and Bon, meaning boy or lad. Dino Rhino is called Raita in Japanese, which comes from the word Raita, or lighter, because he shoots fire out of his mouth like a lighter. And like with every other game we've looked at today, There are many, many more examples of over-localization in Super Mario World, but I think we'll call it a day here, at least for now. When I originally set out to script this video, I thought it'll probably just be a quick little video where we talk about some over-localization in the Super Mario games, but as I kept writing, I realized just how long accomplishing that would take. That's partly because I always get carried away when it comes to localization and translation talk, and partly because there's just so gosh darn many games in the Mario series. If I actually covered everything in this video, it probably would have been over an hour long, so I decided to split things up between 2D, 3D, and possibly handheld Mario games. I'll probably put the 3D one out sometime in the coming weeks if the reception is good for this one, and you guys want to see more. I'm also open to making videos like this about other games that have a lot of over-localization in them, like Animal Crossing and Pokemon. But before I make any promises, let's just see how this one goes, I guess. But anyway, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It always means a lot to me. If you enjoyed what you saw and heard here today, consider giving the video a like. It's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Hack out. They really went with Boo Diddly and thought it sounded good. What a time the 90s were. What a time.